Hi, welcome to the Basic of Coaching. This is going to be our first in the series. It's going to be the air squat. So we're going to go over the progression for the air squat and some common things that you'll see and some places that my eyes go and the progression that I use. Now, there are many different progressions out there for getting people from the start to the finish of any movement. The ones that I'm going to use here are just the ones that I've found that work the best for me. And I'll try to vocalize my internal dialogue so you understand why I do what I do. So let's start with the air squat. First off, let me get my lovely demo person out here. There you are. You are looking good. Anywho, we're gonna get this person moving real quick. Now, the points of performance are the things that you're going to be looking for in any given movement. The points of performance for the air squat are hip crease goes below the knee, so full range of motion. The weight stays in the middle of the foot and towards the heel throughout the entire lift. We've got a neutral spine throughout the entirety of the lift, and we've got our knees tracking over our toes. The other kind of auxiliary point of performance is that the line of action is back and down. So it's not a straight down drop, it's not an all the way back drop, it's kind of like a back and down, engage the hamstrings in the posterior and pull ourselves to the bottom. So we're gonna go over how I teach this. And again, the point of a progression is simply to get people doing the points of performance, and give you as a coach the opportunity to coach those points of performance in almost isolated settings. So this is kind of how I would teach somebody who walked into an on-ramp session who's like, hey, I want to do this thing I heard called squatting. Take me through it. We're gonna assume that you've already done the pleasantries of getting to know the person, getting to know their history, talking about their injuries, all those fun things. We're gonna go straight to the actual progression that I'm gonna use. So the progression that I use for the squat is actually different than a lot of people, and I'll tell you why I use it the way I use it. I'm not saying that other people's are wrong. This is just what I've found to be effective for a vast number of people that I've worked with. So the progression that I'm gonna use is first talk about stance, get their feet adjusted correctly. Then it's going to be talking about weight in the heels and where the weight is in the foot throughout the entirety of the lift. Do a couple reps there. Then we're going to be talking about the knees and what the knees do throughout this movement. Then we're going to be talking about the range of motion that's required for a squat to be a squat. And then we are going to layer on top the midline and basically making sure we maintain neutral spine throughout the entire lift. Now, I'll go over a sec why I teach it this way, kind of towards the end, but let's kind of jump into how I'm going to go about teaching that. So first things first, I'm going to talk about the stance. So I'm going to say, okay, right now, what I need you to do is take about a shoulder width stance. So their stance is going to go to about shoulder width. And what we're looking for is heels in line with the shoulders. Now, people will mess this up in all number of different ways. They'll go take too narrow, they'll take too wide, they have no idea where their shoulders are. But you as the coach you have to own the situation. You have to look at it and be like, okay, where are they right now? Where do I need them to be? And until they are where you want them, you can't progress to the next place. So that's the process of coaching. You have something in your head that you want, you get them to do what you want, you pay attention to how they're going, do whatever it takes to get them to do what you want, and then from there, you can move forward in your progressions. Don't just have a progression as a way of saying things. It's a way of saying things so that you can see things pop up. So I'm gonna be looking at the feet. So get your stance to a shoulder width stance. Great, a little bit wider. Okay, a little bit narrower. Okay, maybe a little bit wider. Okay, right there, good. Now from here, I'm gonna adjust the feet and say, okay, your feet, I want your feet slightly toed out. So push them out a little bit. Great, that's perfect, right there. And depending on the type of person you're dealing with, you don't actually need to tell them why you're doing all this. You just need to make them do it more than anything else. So, okay, great. I like your feet there. Let's stay there the entire time. Okay, now here's what I want you to do. As we squat, we need to make sure we have our weight in our heels. Heels is the back side of the foot. So when I say down, you're gonna go down. When I say up, you're gonna come up. All I want you thinking about is keeping your weight back in your heels. Now, how you're gonna start to do this is you're gonna push your butt back and you're going to try to keep your weight in your heels. So this is the first thing I'm coaching, is keeping the weight in the heels. Now, as my eyes, what I'm going to be looking for is the foot and the weight and where it's distributed in the foot. So I go like this. When I say down, go down. When I say up, come up. All you're thinking about is keeping your weight in your heels. Ready? And down, eyes, foot. And up, eyes, foot. All I'm looking at is their heel, their foot. That's it. I'm taking that out of all the other stuff that could be going wrong, the range of motion, the knees, all that fun stuff, and just looking at the weight in the foot. Now, the number of things that will go wrong here are enormous, but the number one is that people will shift midway through to the ball of the foot or the toe. So as they go down, you'll see them start to go down. Let's go ahead and show me what that looks like. Go down, and then this shift to the ball of the foot. Now, if that's the case, say, hey, sit back in your heels a little bit more. Yes, that's it, right, like that. And stand up. That's what I want every time. Do it again, see if you can see it, and down. Great, good adjustment, and up. That's what we're looking for right there. Now, the other thing you might see is you might see somebody all the way back in their heels, like falling over backwards. Ready? And show me what that looks like. Down. Yeah, see how they're like fluttering their toes and back there? Now, if this is really extreme, I might correct it here and be like, hey, just plant your big toe on the ground and grab the ground with your foot. Okay, that's what we're looking for. Be a little bit more balanced like that. But more often than not, what you're gonna see is people being way kind of mid-foot to toe rather than way back in the heel. If you see that, then you can adjust right there, no issues. So you're gonna do 1 or 2 reps here, maybe 3 or 4, just focusing on weight in the heel. And then we go, okay, cool, you get that? Every time we squat, we need that weight in the heel. It's not really a negotiable piece, so we need to make sure we keep that weight in the heel. Now, depending on somebody's history or their physiology or their backgrounds, they might have a really, really hard time doing this. If that's the case, you just spend more time there. But either way, you need to hold them to that standard. That weight being balanced about the foot and the heel is something that's gonna permeate every other movement that they do. So if you don't focus on it now, they won't be able to do it in the future. Or they'll be able to pattern around being all wishy-washy in that foot, and that's just not what we're going for. So next one we got is we're gonna talk about the knees. We say, okay, we gotta have that weight in the heel, but I also want the knees tracking out over the toe. So it's not either or, it's a both and. We want the knees tracking out of the toe, and we need the weight in the heel. Now, generally where we see people make mistakes here, and this is true, is people will let the knees cave in. So what I want you to think about doing is keeping the weight in the heels and pushing your knees out. So that's what I'll do. I'll say, on this one, think about keeping your weight in your heels and pushing your knees out. I've layered on 1 point of performance, and where do you think I'm gonna be looking? I'm gonna be looking at their knees. I'm also gonna be glancing back to their heel to make sure they don't screw that one up. But generally, through the repetition we've done on that heel one, they'll still do that. And now I just look to where their knees are, and then also still pay attention to where that weight is in the foot. So ready? And down. And if they're not doing it, I say push your knees out a little bit harder. Good. And stand up. Oh, knees caved in on the way up. Let's, as you stand up, push the knees out as well. Down and up. Great. Now, generally you wouldn't be able to stand in one spot here. You might have to move around to figure out what's going on with the person, but I can see it pretty well from what's going on here. Very rarely what'll happen, but it can happen, is somebody will actually drive their knees out too far. And how that manifests itself is pushing your knees out so far that the foot lifts up and the big toe comes off the ground. It looks like this, down and up. If that's the case, just say, hey, too far. Plant your big toe on the ground, keep it on the ground, and then push into that. So try it again, go down. Okay, now grab the ground with your big toe, push out, great, and stand up. And for the most part, that's gonna fix, I'd say that's fixed everybody I've ever seen who's pushing out too far, and it's actually far less of a problem than some people on the internet make it out to be. But yeah, that's what we'll see. So we've got 2 points of performance, weight in the heels and knees out. You get a couple more reps there, making sure people do that. Next, we layer on range of motion. Now this is where we can go on a little spiel, not Chris, but spiel, about what range of motion is and why we have it. So range of motion standards are there in order to make people not cheat. No, not at all. Range of motion standards are there so they can make it so we as humans can move through the range of motions that life is going to require from us. We're taking the joints, the ligaments, the tendons, the musculature, all through a full complement of their abilities so that we have that capacity when life comes at us, because that's what's gonna happen. That's why we're training, is so we can do life. So we need to be able to go all the way down and stand all the way back up. You can't go through life being able to half sit down. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, I guess you could argue that chairs are a half sit down, but that's BS. We want to be able to go all the way down. So we can give a little spiel like, hey, range of motion standards are really important. Not only do they allow us to accurately test yourself against yourself, but it's how the body's made to move. If you don't do it, you'll lose it. You don't use it, you'll lose it. And that's why we're going to hold you to those standards. It's not to be mean, it's just so, it's important to have standards in life, and we're going to hold them to you because that's the kind of gym that we are. Cool? All right. So in the case of the squat, we need the hip crease to go below the knee. So as you go down, I want the hip going clearly below the knee and then standing back up. And generally you'll have to give a visual cue for this one, show them what that looks like. And so, hey, we're now gonna keep the same other points of performance, weight in the heels, the knees tracking out, but we're gonna go all the way down till the hip crease goes below the knee. Then we're gonna stand all the way back up until we're fully standing. So don't throw out the weight in the heels, don't throw out the knees driving out, but keep those and still go down. Now, as the athlete goes to do this, where do you think I'm gonna be looking? That's right, I'm gonna be looking at where the hips go below the knee, but I'm also gonna be paying attention to the knees and the weight in the foot. We can't lose those other points of performance in an effort to get the next ones. We always have to be going over those points of performance so that people build those patterns and do them without thinking. And we, when they're learning, are their brains. You as coaches are their brains, and you need to make your patterning and your stuff very, very consistent so that way they can develop these patterns and eventually do them on their own. So eyes go to foot, knees, but also range of motion. So you say, and down, stop, a little deeper, stop. Okay, push the knees out a bit more, great. Sit back in your heels a little bit, great. Stand. All right, let's do that again. And so now you're watching all of the little pieces and you're holding them to the 3 standards that you had before. Hip goes all the way down, knees drive out, weight stays in the foot, all that fun stuff. Now, to be honest, what happens here is stuff will start to go to shit a little bit more when people start reaching the end ranges of their current capacity. If they get down there and they don't have that range, it happens where they can't get all the way down and they'll have to maybe compromise on some other points in order to get there. Generally, they don't have to make the compromise in the knees and the weight in the foot. Generally, it's going to be making the compromise in the rounding of the back, which is one of the reasons I teach it last, but we fight for it here, and we'll talk about that again in a second. We do have to have that standard though, and I would say most people can get there, even in the very first session, with a little bit of work. They just either haven't done it very much, or they are unaware as to where it really is. I've actually had 1 or 2 people go down to the bottom and actually not have the strength to stand back up. So like go down to the bottom, come to a knee and stand back up. So that does exist out there, but it's far less often than people who just have never been there before or are a little tight. And in both those cases, a little bit of persistence with sitting on top of them and being like, hey, this is what I need from you. I need you to go a little deeper, a little deeper, a little deeper. Generally gets them to where you need them to go. What you will see sometimes though is people who get to the very bottom and they kind of bind up. And this might be a time where you can adjust where that stance is. So maybe you take them a little wider, maybe take them a little narrower. You can look to see how they're starting, whether they're shoving their knees forward and it's kind of ending up in the hips, or they're letting their knees cave a bit and it's kind of pinching through that hip area. But you can make some small adjustments here to see if maybe you can get them some more range. This is a place where you'll see some stuff start to go down though, but we do need to get people clearly below parallel. And if you're looking at it and you're like, I don't really know, it's really close, then just say it's not there and ask them to do a little bit more. Go ahead and stand on up. And then with this, the range of motion that we're looking for is a pain-free range of motion. Like not, hey, I'm completely comfortable. Like they shouldn't necessarily be comfortable, but they should not be in like sharp, stabby pain. If they're down there and they're like, ouch, stabby, pain, be like, okay, that's not a range of motion that's appropriate for you. We'll keep you higher and work you down there eventually. But it's not gonna change the fact that eventually they need to get there unless they've got like a steel plate in their hip or some malformed head of a femur that's making things really weird. Again, those are very few and far between things that I've in the thousands of athletes that I've coached have seen them a small handful of times. I think some people who are in the more rehab side of things, or even prehab side of things, people who are in the like physiotherapy world, they tend to see the broken people more often. So they think that broken people are more common. But in terms of the general populace, the way people move is pretty damn good. Like, with very little coaching, most people have the physical capacity to move through the range of motions that life's gonna require them to do. And with a little bit of persistence, coaching, care, and love, you can get people to these places. Let me stand off my soapbox for a second and get back to this progression that we're going through. With this, we've now got the weight in the heels, we've got the knees tracking out of the toes, we've got the range of motion, and we're all set. Now, I lay on probably the most important point of performance, and the reason I do this one here, rather than doing this one in the beginning, is because I find by building the foundation, I tend to have greater success with my athletes. And the foundation being the stance, where their hips are going, what their knees are doing, where the weight is in the foot, that kind of stuff. I build that first just because it's the foundation, and if I don't have that, they generally don't do well in this next part. And if I teach this next part first, and then have them try to do all that, they tend to be so focused on the first part I taught them that they have a hard time adjusting those other pieces. I know plenty of people who don't teach it this way. This is just how I teach it. Next thing we're going to teach them is the midline stability, or the neutral spine, or this concept of maintaining a unbending midline through all the stuff that we do. Now, we talk about the concept, we say, hey, now we're going to talk about neutral spine, and we're talking about keeping an upright chest. Essentially what we're looking for is making sure this natural S curvature of your back stays exactly the same throughout the entirety of this movement. We don't want to be flexing and bending as we're doing this movement. If that's the case, we've kind of screwed up and we put ourselves at the potential for injury. Now, this might not be easy, but I'm going to ask you to work really hard for it. So what we're going to do is we're going to have you start and think about everything you just did. Knees track out, weight stays in the heels, go full range of motion, but now you're going to have your hands out front. As you go down, I want you to think about pulling your hands up over your head. Now, we can't throw everything else we just did out the window. We have to still do all that stuff, but now as we go down, you pull your hands up. Now, it might look like this if you're tight in your shoulders, and that's okay. I just want the fight there. And it's less about what your arms are doing and more about that when I lift your arms up, your chest comes up and your back becomes flat, okay? So right here, you say, when I say down, go down. When I say up, come up. So here, ready, hands out front and down. Pull the hands up, pull the hands up. Good. Wait, keep driving those knees out. Now where are my eyes going? They're going to the back, they're going to what's happening here, but I have to make sure I don't throw everything else out the window. Keep back in the heels, keep back in the heels. Good, knees out, chest up. Good. And stand. Awesome. All right. Let's do that again. You feeling it? Mm-hmm. All right, and down. And stand. Wow, good for you. Now, it won't look that great, in all honesty. It's not gonna just all of a sudden be magical and you'll be like, hey, there's the athlete and they're moving super well. Generally, what's going to happen is people are gonna have a lot of flaws start to pop up here, or they won't be able to hit range, or their knees will start to cave, or they'll drop to their toes, and it can be for a number of reasons. More than anything, we want them maintaining as many of the points of performance as possible and fighting for the best possible position on every single rep. So you're gonna ask a lot from the athlete. You're gonna ask them to really fight. You're gonna ask them to hold those positions. You're gonna ask them to revisit those other points of performance throughout every single rep of this, while also layering on that neutral spine piece. So be relentless with your people here. Be on top of the person, trying to get them to move to the best of their ability. And you as the coach get to help facilitate that through the words that you're using, through the interactions that you're having, and it'll make it a little bit more magical an experience for them. Now, a couple things that can happen here, or a couple things that could help here too. Let's just talk about what could happen. One of the things that sometimes happens, it's not super often, but it'll happen where someone throws their hips back and turns over their pelvis. So they'll be here and they'll pop their hip back like this and squat on down. When they do that, they disengage the abs and they end up overextending the low back a little bit, and also usually end up making it so they hit the bottom and kind of do this weird come back to neutral butt wink sort of dealio. So if that's the case, we just need to think about bracing before we start a little bit more. Now again, people make it out like this happens all the freaking time. It happens, but it's not as often as you think, and it's a pretty easy cue. You just say, hey, right now you're doing this and you're throwing your butt back. I want you to think about bracing your stomach right now. Okay, now with that braced stomach, do the same thing you were doing before. So you just layer on top of what you've done before, address that midline, that throwing of the hips back, and make it so they don't do that. It's not the hardest thing to do in the world, and it's a couple cues away and you can get them adjusting there. But that's something that as a coach, you're gonna continually revisit back to that athlete and make sure that they're not, and popping that butt out and going to town on throwing those hips back. So that's what we're looking for there. The other thing that might help some people is doing something like an assisted weighted version. So getting a plate and having it, you wanna pick up the plate? Good. Turn around and using the plate as a bit of an assist. So what they'll do is turn sideways, and as you go down there, you can extend the plate out and use that as a way of lifting your torso a bit more upright and kind of getting some counterbalance to that. You can have them work themselves down a pole, but there's where you kind of hand over hand down and hand over hand back up. But the plate is pretty useful for a lot of people. Allows them to be in positions that they've never felt before, really grease the groove, maybe build some muscle memory there. So lighter and lighter plates will make it so you have to use more and more of their own physiology to make that happen. And that's generally a great tool for somebody who's having a hard time keeping the upright chest or all those fun pieces. So again, let's go over the progression that I use and kind of where my eyes are going as a quick overview. We've got, first, I talk about stance. Then I talk about weight in the heels. Then I talk about knees driving out. Then I talk about full range of motion. Then I talk about midline stability. Now within each one of these places, I'm essentially looking at the thing that I've just taught them, plus the thing that I taught them before that. So I start fresh, I look at one thing at a time, then I look at two things, then three, then four, and if stuff starts to manifest, I correct as they go. That's my basic progression for the air squat, and there's a million variations of this, and there's a million different type of people you'll run into, but that gets 90% of people that I've ever dealt with moving pretty well, pretty quickly. Enjoy. High five? Nah, bad idea.